Introduction to the Science of Hadith by Ibn al-Salah al-Shahrazuri. 8. When it becomes clear from what we've said above that the way to identify sound and fair hadith is now confined to the consultation of the two sahihs and other authoritative books, it will be seen that the course open to the student who wants to act on these hadith or cite them as proof, if he is one of those permitted to act on hadith and cite them as proofs to a partisan, is to consult a copy of the text which he personally or some other reliable person has collated against numerous sound copies transmitted through several different channels. So through the collation, in conjunction with the ubiquity of these books and the improbability that they were intentionally changed or corrupted, he obtains confidence in the soundness of what those texts agree upon. God knows best what is correct. Category 2. Fair Hadith. Ma'rifat al-Hasan min al-Hadith. After relating that hadith, according to the scholars of this discipline, fall into the three divisions we mentioned above, we heard that Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi, God bless him, said, "Fair is the hadith, the source of which is known and the transmitters of which are famous." Most hadith fall into this category, and it is the category which most scholars accept and the generality of jurists employ. We heard that Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi, God be pleased with him, meant by fair that it is, quote, that no one in the isnad of the hadith is accused of falsehood, that it is not an anomalous hadith, and that something similar to it is related for more than one line of transmission. One of the most recent experts said, "Fair is the hadith in which there is a slight but tolerable weakness. It is suitable for use. All of this is ambiguous and inadequate." Nothing in the definitions of Tirmidhi and Khattabi distinguishes the fair hadith from the sound. I have examined and researched the question of the fair hadith at length, collecting the scattered remarks of the experts and taking note of the instances of their usage of this term. It became abundantly clear that there are two subcategories of fair hadith. 1. The hadith, the isnad of which includes an outwardly acceptable individual whose suitability has not yet been confirmed. This individual is not careless, prone to mistakes in what he transmits, nor accused of falsehood in hadith. That is, he manifests neither the practice of deliberately lying in hadith, nor any other reason for vitiating his integrity. In addition, it has become known that a text like that of the hadith or one similar to it has been transmitted through one or more different lines of transmission. In this way, the hadith is reinforced by the parallelism of someone else being in conformity with its transmitter, with something like it, or by another attestation to it. That is, the appearance of another hadith with a similar text. This way, the possibility that it is anomalous or unfamiliar, munkar, is excluded. The remarks of Tirmidhi concern this subcategory of fair hadith. 2. The hadith, the transmitter of which is someone famous for veracity and honesty, who however did not attain the grade of the transmitters of sound hadith because he fell short of them in retention and exactitude. Despite that, his state is superior to that of the transmitter whose hadiths are counted as unfamiliar if he is alone in transmitting them. For all of this, the hadith must be first considered to be secure from being defective, mu'allal, as well as secure from being anomalous, shadh, or unfamiliar. The remarks of Khattabi concern the second subcategory of fair hadith. What we have said brings together the scattered comments of those whose remarks on the fair hadith have come to our attention. It is as if Tirmidhi had mentioned one of the two categories of the fair hadith and Khattabi had mentioned the other, each of them limiting himself to what he regarded as problematic and passing over what he saw as unproblematic, or paying no attention to some aspects of it, overlooking them. God knows best. The preceding was an enumeration of the principal aspects of the fair hadith, and we will now clarify the matter through a discussion of certain points worth noting and certain subsidiary issues. 1. The fair hadith falls short of the sound in that the standard of the sound requires the integrity, accuracy and exactitude of all the transmitters of the sound hadith to be established, either by explicit transmission or by way of general acknowledgement, as we will explain. God willing. That it is not stipulated for the fair hadith, as stated above, the appearance of the hadith from several paths of transmission and from other conditions which were explained earlier do suffice in the care of the fair Hasan hadith. Whenever a Shafi'i jurist regards with skepticism, we remind him of the provision of Shafi'i, God be pleased with him, concerning the loose hadith, mursal, of the followers, that he accepted a loose hadith for which there was a similar supported version, musnad. Likewise, he accepted a loose hadith if another loose hadith transmitted by someone who has not studied with the teachers of the first follower was in agreement with it. Shafi said Safi said this in some of his remarks, where he speaks of several ways of determining the soundness of the source of a loose hadith on the basis of it coming from another line of transmission. We also remind the skeptical Shafi'ite that Abu al-Muzaffar al-Sam'ani and others related from one of the students of Shafi'i that the transmission of an outwardly acceptable transmitter is to be accepted, even if the testimony of an outwardly acceptable individual may not be accepted in court. And there is a cogent reason for that. So how could a Shafi'i object when a hadith to be considered fair we would not be satisfied in accordance with the foregoing remarks, but its mere relation by an outwardly acceptable individual? God knows best. 2. Perhaps some clever investigator will say, we find hadith judged as weak despite their having been related with many isnads through numerous lines of transmission, like the hadith, the ears are part of the head, and similar ones. Why do you not conclude that hadith and the others like it in this category of the fair hadith, because the various versions reinforce one another in the fashion you have previously described regarding fair hadith? The answer to this is that not every weakness in a hadith is eliminated by the hadith coming from several lines of transmission. Rather, the situation varies. One weakness which the passage of a hadith through several lines of transmission eliminates is the weakness which arises from some deficiency in the retention of its transmitter, when he is otherwise veracious and pious. When we see that the hadith he related also comes from another line of transmission, we realize that it is one of the hadith that he retained properly and his accuracy in it was not impaired. Likewise, when the weakness of the hadith is on account of looseness, it disappears because of something along these lines, as is the case of the loose hadith which the expert of authority transmits as loose, since it contains just a small weakness which disappears through its relation with another line of transmission. There are also types of weakness which are not eliminated by something similar to that, an account of the severity of the weakness and the failure of this bone setter to reduce the fracture in it and mend it. An example of this is the weakness which arises from the transmitter being accused of falsehood or from the hadith being anomalous. This is an outline, the particulars of which are acquired through practice and study, so beware of that. It is one of the fine points, and God knows best. 3. If a transmitter of a hadith lags behind the grade of those who are retentive and exact, yet it is widely known for veracity and respectability, and in addition to this the hadith was related through more than one line of transmission, the strength of the hadith is reinforced from both sides, and that lifts this hadith from the grade of fair to the grade of sound. An instance of this is the hadith of Muhammad ibn Amr from Abu Salama from Abu Hurairah from the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, who said, "Were it not that I would impose a burden on my community, I would have ordered them to clean their teeth with a toothstick before every prayer." Muhammad ibn Amr ibn Alqamah was renowned for veracity and piety, but he lacked exactitude. So some regard him as weak on account of his poor retention, while others deemed him reliable because of his veracity and augustness. Thus his hadith from this standpoint is only fair. When the circumstance that the hadith is related through other lines of transmission was combined with that, our fears about his poor retention vanished, and that slight shortcoming was mended. So this isnad was established as sound, and the hadith attained the level of sound, and God knows best. 4. The book of Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi, God bless him, is a fundamental document for the recognition of fair hadith. He is one of those who is referred to in the category. He is one who referred to this category of hadith by this name, and he used the term in his Jami'. The term Hasan is also scattered throughout the remarks of some of his teachers and members of the generation of scholars before him, like Ibn Hanbal, Bukhari, and others. The various copies of Tirmidhi's book differ in its designations. This is a fair hadith, this hadith is fair and sound, hadith Hasan Sahih, and the like. So it's best that you correct your copy of it against a batch of other copies and rely upon what they agree upon. Daraqutni in his Sunan explicitly designates many of his hadith as fair, and his designation also occurs often in the Sunan of Abu Dawud as-Sijistani. We heard, and he said, I mentioned in my Sunnah the sound hadith and those similar and close to them. We also heard his remarks to the effect that he mentions for each topic the soundest hadith known to him. He said, I have indicated those hadith in my book that contain a severe debility. The hadith I do not say anything about are good, salih, and some are sounder than others. On this basis, the hadith we found mentioned in the book without any designation, if they are not either of the two, sahih, so no scholar who discriminates between the sound and the fair designates them a sound. We know it to be fair in the opinion of Abu Dawood, although some of them may not be fair in the opinion of others, and may not be included in the material which we have established the accuracy of calling fair in accordance with what has been said above. This is because when the expert Abu Abdullah ibn Manda related that he heard Muhammad ibn Sa'id al-Bawardi saying in Egypt, it was Abu Abdurrahman al-Nasa'i's way to include all the hadith of those transmitters who are not unanimously rejected. Ibn Manda himself added, Abu Dawood as-Sijistani as well adopts the same course, including having weak hadith isnads if he does not find anything else on the topic, because in his view they were stronger than the arbitrary opinions of men. God knows best. Stay tuned for many more parts.